of my today's topic is complexities of regulation 30 and 30A of SEBI listing regulation. Friends, this topic is disturbing and is creating lot of confusion with everyone. Lot of thing, lot of question. Each company, each industry, each factory has peculiar situation, and the question is whether we have to comply or not. And it's a continuous and it's a new thing, so it will be take time. But to avoid all this confusion and get more clarification, today we have with our panelist, Mr. Randhir Singh, the Company Secretary, Compliance Officer, and CSR Head of Dr. Reddy's Laboratories Limited. Welcome, Mr. Randhir Singh. We have our own Mr. Sudhakar, and we have Mr. Bala also with us. So welcome all. And we have today presenter, Ms. Kanchan, who will be presenting the presentation. Let me take this opportunity to formally introduce our panelist. Mr. Randhir is a Company Secretary, Compliance Officer, and CSR Head of Dr. Reddy's Laboratories Limited. His areas of expertise are corporate governance, legal, ESG, CSR, and process. Mr. Singh has more than 20 years of experience in corporate governance, legal, secretarial, CSR. He is a group company secretary of Dr. Reddy's and is also heading the CSR function of Dr. Reddy's group. Previously, Mr. Singh was working with Colgate-Palmolive as a company secretary and compliance officer and was head legal for Colgate Global Business Services. Prior to Colgate, he has worked with reputed organizations like GE Capital, NIIT in lead roles. He is also serving as a member of FICCI's Corporate Law Committee, CII National Committee on Regulatory Affairs, CII Task Force on Legal Services, and CII Subcommittee on Business and Corporate Laws. He is a fellow member of ICSI, is BCom, and is Master of Business Administration with Finance Specialization. And also his LLB. Welcome, Mr. Randhir. Long experience and knowledge. Our panelists are surely going to get benefit from your experience and knowledge. Welcome. Thanks for your timing.
Thank you, Dipti.
And I'll request here Mr. Randhir to say a few words on the topic, then Mr. Sudhakar, and then Mr. Bala. And then Kanchan, you can start the presentation. Mr. Randhir, few words on the topic, please.
Thank you, Dipti. I think the topic is one of the most burning topic in our fraternity and among the listed entities. And I think this is a step in right direction. Of course, when a new amendment comes in LOTR, that to this big magnitude, last came in 2019. It takes time to settle. We all group together this kind of webinar, other understanding, make it more clear. And we are in that phase again, where a lot of discussion, deliberation is happening. I think SEBI has come up with guidance to ease some of the issues that we were facing in terms of the timing of disclosure, in terms of how to compute in case of losses. So I think it will take some time, but it is a step in right direction. Regulation 30 and the Schedule 3A and B both have some of the issues where probably when situation arise, we will be in a fix, and it will require a lot of interpretation, deliberation, and gradually the clarity will come. So I'm very optimistic that this is one step in right direction by SEBI. And as an industry, as a country, this is something that will add value to the overall ecosystem for listed entities. Thank you. You're on mute, Dipti.
Yes,
over to Sudhakar, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. And thanks very much, Randhir, for joining our webinar. And friends, that as Dipti has rightly mentioned, this is a very important, complex, and complicated subject which we thought that though we had a discussion about a couple of weeks before on the same topic, listing regulations, but still we thought that let us have a more emphasis and focus as far as Regulation 30 and Regulation 30A is concerned. Because slowly and steadily we are able to digest what are the amendments which have come, which are further arising a lot of issues that what to inform, what not to inform. And one thing is very clear that before we take any decision, what is to be mandatorily to be informed, what is not to be mandatorily informed, where we have to apply the material guidelines. One thing is clear that SEBI listing regulations have given a lot of importance to dissemination of the information right from the beginning 2015 onwards. The amount of information what is to be disseminated to all the stakeholders, that was one of the primary objective of the SEBI listing regulations. A lot of emphasis was given to this dissemination of quantity, quality, as well as timeliness of information. If you see the chapter 2 of SEBI listing regulations, it is clearly mentioned that it is the objective and the purpose is not only to disseminate the information, but the information what you are disseminating is to be quality information, quantity information, as well as timeliness of the information. That means what the information we are disseminating, we should not just dump with loads and loads of information to the stakeholders or the public. At the same point of time, that doesn't mean you just give a helicopter view of the things, what is happening. But both quality as well as quantity is equally important. Apart from that thing, of course, the timeliness when you are informing it. That's why the timelines have been now given very clearly, whether it is 30 minutes of the conclusion of the board meeting or 12 hours or 24 hours. That is the purpose of that. The object of Regulation 30 is to disclose any information or event that is likely to affect the business, that is likely to impact the price of your securities in the market, because this information is exclusively known to the listed entity or some of its officials, and which is certainly necessary for the public also to understand more about the company and its securities so that they can take a position. And at the same point of time to also avoid the establishment of false market based on the rumors. So again, the same thing here that though we have, of course, para A, part A of similarly para B of part A, which is mandatorily to be informed and which is to be informed with application of the guidelines. Now, further clarity has been given and further emphasis has been given with these kind of amendments. But the unfortunate thing is that still a lot of issues are there. Some trivial issues are also there, which we will discuss it and try to find out that, how we have to comply with these regulations and how to avoid the complexities. So I give a pause here and request Bala to take it forward.
Good morning to all of you. I have a great pleasure in welcoming you all for this today morning session on behalf of Mehta and also on my own behalf. And I'm very sure this webinar will definitely add knowledge to each one of us. And as our earlier panelist said, it is an amendment which came very recently. The whole purpose of the regulation seems to be any event which is actually happening, which is happening in the company, and which is actually bearing the performance and the operations of the company, which will in turn should avoid the misuse of insider trading, etc. As Sudhakar puts it, privileged information is available only to some selected people, etc. and other things and all. In order to curb that insider trading activities, basically, the whole regulation has been brought and a lot of responsibility has been costed on the listed companies. So listed companies have to not only disclose, but that timely disclosure, that is very, very important. The whole idea is here, when you talk about the timely disclosure, if you go to the regulation 30 subclass 1, which actually says that every listed entity is required to make the disclosure on any events of the information. Again, which is in the opinion of the board of directors of the company, of the listed company, is material. The word which is using is material. Because the material, when you are actually talking about it, has been used in many things, especially in the related party transaction. But the material word which is used in the provision here is not exactly like what is used in the related party transaction. Then the question arises actually, what is material? The question, what is material, is really a difficult question to answer, because the whole idea is the principle of the thought, and it is often used in many statutes in the different connotations, etc. It is very difficult to state what is exactly the material. But if we actually say what is the literal meaning of the material, it is an important which is need to be considered when making a decision. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, investors would like to make a decision in respect to the companies in which they are actually investing it. So we have to actually interpret the important and needing to be considered when making a decision. That is also whatever the substantial, rather crucial importance in connection with the business performance, business operation, etc., which is what it is used actually. So here the consideration is material information, whether it is significant or not significant, whether it is influencing the price sensitivity or not. All those questions are very important. And again, the regulations have also brought certain agreements and arrangements, etc., to be disclosed where the company is not the party, but the connected people are the party. Again, there is a practical difficulty in getting to know how to monitor, how to get the things, and again, what are the things which are to be informed, etc. I think Kanchan has done an elaborative job on this, and she is actually taking us through the post amendments which has actually come. There have been some of the disclosure which has been actually made in SEBI. I think one of the disclosure which has been made by the Murugappa group of companies, which has done the family settlement, she is discussing it. So in the light of that, there are a lot of intricacies, what to disclose, how to ascertain, what is the significant, all things are there. I think today's intricacies will actually take us through, and we will get many clarification coming through with the able panelist with us. I am very sure this is definitely going to be a value-adding session to all of us. Over to Kanchan, please.
Thank you. Kanchan, you start. All the participants, please put your questions in the chat box. And if time permits, you will be allowed to unmute and speak. And panelists, you can interrupt and give any comments or your views during the presentation. Yeah, Kanchan, start it, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, everyone. So today's topic, as rightly said by our panelists, is complexities of Regulation 30 and 30A of SEBI LODR. So just to give a brief introduction of what this whole amendment is about, to strengthen the corporate governance in respect of listed companies, on 14th of June 2023, SEBI passed significant amendments to the SEBI Listing Obligations and Disclosure Requirement Regulations 2015, LODR, while the SEBI LODR Second Amendment Regulations 2023, which will be effective from 14th of July 2023. So let us understand what is the need for which this amendment has come. So the Amendment Regulations 2023, they came on the heels of major occurrences within the listed space, like the recent Adani and Hindenburg and the Amazon Future Group sagas that we've heard in the news. And so there is an increasing demand for ensuring market symmetry to protect the rights of all the investors and bring transparency and good governance. So let us briefly understand what is the objective of these amendments. They are largely going to be effective. They're already effective from 14th of July, and they broadly seek to enforce higher disclosure and governance standards for listed entities. The changes materially alter key provisions of LODR regulations, including the disclosure framework by inter alia introducing objective criteria for determining material events, information, reducing the timeline for making disclosures, and mandating additional disclosures, including in relation to agreements binding on the listed entities and addressing the market rumors. So we would briefly be walking through with what the objective is and then discussing each of these amendments in detail. So the objective of these amendments is also for better disclosure and approval requirements for special rights granted to the shareholders, and approval requirements for business transfer agreements undertaken outside the scheme of arrangement route, and validity of permanent board seats and timelines for filling the vacancies of directors and KMPs. So broadly, if we have a cursory glance at the Regulation 30, the kind of changes that have been brought in, we can see that there's a disclosure framework which has brought in amendments in Regulation 30 when read with Schedule 3. Mandatory disclosures of continuing events or information, and changes in the materiality policy under Regulation 34. Revised disclosure timelines for material events or information under Regulation 36. Disclosure of agreements binding the listed entities under Regulation 30A, read with Para 5A of Part A of Schedule 3. And then verification of the rumors under Regulation 3011, and other additional disclosures under paragraph A and B of Part A of Schedule 3. So these are the certain changes that have been brought in. We will look at it in detail in the next slides in the presentation. So under Regulation 31, again, we see that there are changes brought in the shareholders' approval of special rights under 31B. Public shareholder approval for business transfer agreements under Regulation 37A, directors, permanency and vacancies. There are certain changes in this under Regulation 17(1)D, and filling in the vacancy of director, CEO, CFO, compliance officer under Regulation 17(1)E, Regulation 26A, and Regulation 61A. So let us have a deliberation on what is the rationale behind this amendment by SEBI. So for delayed disclosure, this amendment has been brought in. And then there is also an increased need for uniformity throughout the industry, for which this has been brought in. Inadequate or inaccurate or misleading disclosures, and for non-compliance, to curb the insider trading. There is also changes that we have seen in the recent past in the definition of UPSI, and then to boost the investor confidence and decision making for the investors at large, and to infuse greater transparency. Any comments from our panelists on this?
No, you can go ahead.
Right. So under Regulation 30, disclosure of certain types of agreements binding listed companies. So all the shareholders, promoters, promoter group entities, related parties, directors, KMPs, and employees of a listed entity or of its holding, subsidiary, and associate company who are parties to the agreements specified in Clause 5A of Para A of Part A of Schedule 3 to these regulations shall inform the listed entity about the agreement to which such a listed entity is not a party within 2 working days of entering into such agreements or signing an agreement to enter into such agreements. Provided that for the agreements that subsist as on the date of notification of Clause 5A to Para A of Part A of Schedule 3, the parties to the agreements shall inform the listed entity about the agreement to which such a listed entity is not a party, and the listed entity shall in turn disclose all such subsisting agreements to the stock exchanges and on its website within the timelines as specified by the board. So clause 5A, it is in respect of events which are to be disclosed as they are deemed material and they are accordingly not subject to the materiality determination that is ordinarily undertaken by the listed companies for disclosures as per para B, part A of schedule 3 under the LODR. According to the newly inserted clause 5A, any agreements which indirectly, directly or potentially or have the purpose or effect of impacting the management or impacting the control of the listed company or imposing any restriction or creating a liability upon the listed company and are not in the ordinary course of business of the listed company, they are required to be disclosed by the listed company under Regulation 30A. So clause 2 talks about the listed entity shall disclose the number of agreements that subsist as on the date of notification of clause 5A to para A of part A of schedule 3, their salient features, including the link to the web page where the complete details of such agreements are available in the annual report for the financial year 22-23 or for the financial year 23-24. So SEBI in the recent past initiated proceedings against listed entities for non-disclosure of information, ranging from lender objections to buyback proposals, tax demands, and deemed material events. The changes notified aim to plug some of these perceived ambiguities. So maybe a query for our panelists to deliberate upon would be, how do you see the practical problems in the process of identification of all such agreements that fall under the scope of Regulation 30A disclosures?
Kanchan, before identifying the agreements, how do you actually get to know the framework of these are all there exist and they are informing it? Because you are covered all the company across. You said holding company, you said subsidiary company, you said the associate company. That means there has got to the framework in the company across. That means, you know, what is called the awareness is to be created amongst all these people. That is the first thing. Then only the agreement of the identification comes into picture. Correct, na?
Right, sir. Absolutely.
Yes, sir, Randhir Singh, we would like to hear from you on this.
Yes, Bala. I think this is one of the complicated provision which has been added. Particularly shareholders and employees, which has been added, makes it more complicated because promoter, related party, KMPs or something, where you have a lot of deliberation and awareness that you are referring can be created. But employees, if you see a company like us will have 25, 30,000. There are companies with more than 3 lakhs employees also. Similarly, shareholders of a listed entity would be anything between, say, 2 lakh, 3 lakhs, 4 lakhs, right? So creating awareness is not something that I see is a main ingredient here. Good thing in the provision is that it casts a responsibility on the parties to the agreement to actually intimate the company, and in turn, company is required to intimate, make the disclosure to the stock exchange. So it is something similar to the insider trading provision, where although the company has responsibility to create framework for compliance of insider trading, monitoring of trade by designated person, but at the same time, everyone who has UPSI is individually and personally responsible to be in compliance and not do trading on the basis of those UPSI. So similarly here, I think those who are going into this agreement, they are under responsibility to intimate to the company, and in turn company is responsible to make the disclosure. And when situation arises, probably it would be difficult to take a view whether it requires a disclosure or not. There may be something which is very, very clear. And there may be a scenario where a lot of interpretation will come into picture. But I see like that the heading of the provision says only those agreements which are binding on the listed entity. So only those agreements which are binding will need to be disclosed. That can be interpreted freely from here. Any agreement which say two shareholders are agreeing and maybe a nuisance, those things also can come. And whether those needs to be disclosed to the stock exchange or not, that is something that has to be, that check and balances has to be created at the level of company. So I think this will evolve, and there may be various scenarios where we will face difficulties and expert opinion.
So, Bala, Randhir, I agree partly with you and partly with Bala. What, Randhir, you are mentioning is that the onus is on the concerned parties. The onus is not on the company. Maybe to some extent that may be correct, but at the same point of time, I cannot say completely the onus is on the concerned parties only if they
correct, Sudhakar, correct. That is exactly the point.
The moment you inform,
company cannot get away saying that, I did not get the information, so I did not inform. That sort of the stand is not going to work. Company has to ensure and see the information is actually received. Yeah.
Correct. So it is the responsibility of the company secretary to sensitize all concerned, because if I read the clause 5A, in fact, it says that agreements entered into by the shareholders, promoters, promoter group entities, related parties, directors, KMPs, employees of the listed entity, or of its holding subsidiary or associate company, among themselves or with the listed entity or with a third party. It is such a broad this thing that all the concerned stakeholders, like your shareholders, promoters, promoter group entities, they may not be aware of this provision. And tomorrow, if that regulator questions the company, and the company cannot say that, look, we have not received any intimation from the concerned parties, so we are not aware of that. They cannot say that.
Correct, correct.
According to me, as Bala has rightly said, that a kind of awareness is to be created. Ultimately, since the company secretary is the compliance officer, I'll put this garland to the company secretary only. He has to take the responsibility and he has to take the initiative to sensitize all concerned that in case in the past, have you entered into any agreements which are having a binding impact on the company? Because who are these people who can enter into such these things? He don't need to go to everybody and anybody. Primarily, what he has to do is he has to sensitize the promoters. Majorly, promoters are the people, if at all they can enter into such kind of agreements, it is the promoters only. In addition to that, no doubt about it, some KMPs like your CEO, managing directors, CFOs, company secretary, or some senior management people, they might have entered into some agreements which are having a binding impact on the company. And further, if you see the wording, the agreements also is either directly or indirectly. So the promoter cannot say that, look, we have some family arrangements which may impact the company, but that is nothing to do with the company as such. No, they can't say that. Even if the family agreements are there, if they are going to affect tomorrow the company or its business, whether directly or indirectly or even potentially also, the word used is even potentially. That means that if it got that agreement has a kind of a potentiality to affect the company, then also that is to be disclosed. And the purpose and effect is to impact the management or control the listed entity. So it is again the same thing. While sensitizing the concerned stakeholders, the company secretary has to clearly inform, because the moment he simply said that by you inform me the agreements which is having an impact on the company, they may not be able to understand and they may be having apprehensive. So he may have to clearly say that, look, because if the purpose and effect of that agreements, if you have entered into with anybody, with maybe even with the third parties also, if they're having a binding impact on the management or control of the listed entity, or they're imposing any restrictions. Now let us see what are these kind of agreements which may be. Say, for example, non-disposal agreements. Or suppose that non-disposal agreement means the promoter will not dispose of the stake for some time, or he may say non-disclosure agreements they might have entered into. Similarly, to some joint venture partners, they might have given the veto powers and right of affirmations. unless until the JV partners pass the resolution. In case of any kind of joint venture companies are there, wherein the listed entity is also going to be a joint venture partner. And if there is an agreement which says that there is a right of affirmation has been given to the joint venture partner, means unless until he gives an affirmative vote, the company cannot go ahead with that particular transaction if that kind of powers have been given. Similarly, appointment of directors, right to appoint the directors, right to remove the directors. And similarly, territorial agreements in case of marketability of the products. If there are territorial agreements are there, by you can't sell in a particular territory. That is going to impact your market. So at the last but not the least, even the family agreements also, they cannot say these are all in my personal domain. If they're having an impact, certainly they have to disclose it. So my view, Randhir, is that company secretaries or the company as such cannot simply say that, look, onus is on you. That awareness creation is certainly the responsibility of the company secretary. This is what my view is. And how to sensitize that, of course, is, because this is, sometimes it may very happen, that is a very sensitive and emotional to the, promoters, especially what regulator looks more is to remove the opaqueness. And that opaqueness also is about these family agreements primarily. So how to approach and how to sensitize the promoters about these family agreements is a major worry. And of course, there our skills may come into place, that how to do that and all. But you cannot just avoid it. We cannot shut our eyes as far as that's concerned. It depends upon the company secretary how to strategize the things and all this. That's how it is.
I completely agree.
It is very simple to say. I'm sure that it is very difficult for the company secretary.
Yeah, practical problem are going to be there definitely when it comes to the implementation. That is what it is. Because that is why we were also looking for any post disclosure which has been made and other things. And now one of the things I came across, as you rightly said, it was a family settlement entered by Murugappa group of companies. The disclosure has been made to the SEBI.
Yeah, I completely agree, Sudhakar, with your view that there is a lot of work to be done by company secretary, and company cannot take out its responsibility. But the impact of this provision is very, very wide. That was I was trying to tell, that even if you do the awareness, say to entire shareholder, you will send one communication, or to the entire employee set, you also give. The people who will be going into such agreement would be limited. I agree with you. And their role of company secretary and proactively discussing that this falls under the requirements of 30A, it meets the ingredient, those 4 ingredients, and so the disclosure would be required, is something that that earlier also we were doing. And now when this provision has come, it becomes a necessary disclosure. So that of course has to be done at the company level and company secretary level. And as Bala said, there are already some disclosures coming. I was just trying to emphasize on 2 things which has been added in this provision. One is shareholders, which is again a very large group, and there may or may not be some agreement. I agree with you. Again, the employees, because KMP was already there added. Senior management could have been added to extend to very senior people who can actually influence this kind of agreement. But the word as is added is employees, which is like a huge number of people. And what kind of those agreements which may have these 4 ingredients and would require disclosure will depend company to company and what one's mind can think of. But yes, these 2-3 things are certainly making this provision much larger in its impact. And when I was saying associate company, generally the process policies of the companies are to some extent applicable to holding company, subsidiary company, but associate companies are generally very differently managed, and they're taking those employees and creating a governance mechanism where proactively you have all these agreements, right? So unless it is something big which is happening where you have views and you can influence those, rest all will totally come as a surprise from third parties who will send you, and at that time, company has to take a call that whether it meets the requirement and issue disclose or not. Nothing beyond that I intended. And I completely agree on the view that there is a lot of work here in terms of sensitization when such development is happening, when say promoters holding is there and that getting bifurcated, there is any change which may roll out in terms of these 4 ingredients, then that needs to be now mindfully reviewed for disclosure, and timely disclosure is required there. So of course, this is one important development, and I agree what you mentioned.
In fact, I would, sorry. Yeah, Dipti, go ahead.
Just one question to panelist, means one request. Can you elaborate binding? Because when you say binding agreement, which agreement is not binding? When you enter the agreement, it is binding, all agreement. So, for clarity purpose, can you elaborate what is the meaning here of binding?
Dipti, what I said, binding is very clear. It is a direct or indirect or a potential this thing. Agreements means what? Say, for example, when you are entering into a collaboration, joint venture agreement, in that joint venture agreement, the joint venture partners, maybe your promoter and the joint venture partner, the company may not be a party to that directly, but they might be having an understanding among themselves that territorial jurisdiction as far as your marketability of your products are concerned. Similarly, say, for example, in one of the companies where I was working earlier, we were having a technical collaboration. In that technical collaboration, there was one clause that while using the technology, if my R&D team make a new invention, who will be having the right on that new invention? Is it the JV partner who has given me the technology, or the JV partner, which is the Indian company, which could invent that particular thing? So this is, suppose if the JV partner is putting a clause that any further inventions, any further new ideas, technology and all the things, the right will be there with the person who has imparted you the technology, then obviously it is having a binding impact on the company. So what, according to me, is how to approach this as far as this agreements part is concerned. Fortunately, in several companies, company secretary is custodian of all the agreements entered into by the company itself. Most of the times it happens. No head of the department will keep the copy of the agreement with him only without sharing with the company secretary. To a large extent, it happens. Having said that, sometimes it may not. It may so also happen that the respective senior management officials might be having the copies whom they might not have shared with the company. So a kind of a stock taking is to be taken as far as the agreements are concerned. Several good companies having this thing that a confidential portal they created, and no one should conceal the agreements. Everyone has to put those agreements are concerned on that portal, and very few senior officials will be having the access to the portal in addition to the company secretary. Having said that, the company secretaries have to see all these kind of agreements. Are they having any kind of binding impact on the company in view of this amendment which has come? If they have not disclosed such agreements to the stock exchanges, now they have to take a call under Reg 30. Do I need to intimate or not? Now, who will take this decision? Obviously, the board might have authorized some KMPs who will be the 3-4 people who will be taking this decision. If they are able to take it, fine. Otherwise, they will escalate it to the board whether to intimate or not to intimate. This is to be done on priority. In addition to this, it may so happen that when certain material, suppose vendor agreements may be there, supplier agreements may be there. Certain suppliers, when there are key raw material is there, when they are supplying with the material, they may be putting some kind of a restrictive clauses. Okay, especially say, for example, if you are procuring uranium, okay, which is a very precious material. For some company, that might be a staple food. It is a key raw material. Now, when you are procuring it, the suppliers are very limited and they might be putting hell of a restrictive clauses in that agreement, in the supplier's agreement. Are they going to impact your company or not? How it is going to be? So this is not a small job. This is a heavy job. But only thing is, who will initiate the discussion? According to me, it is the company secretary who has to sensitize his seniors, maybe managing directors, maybe the board of directors, maybe the CFOs. Thus, initiative is to be taken by the company secretary. The time is taking out. So it is on yesterday's basis, this particular job is to be done. That's what my view.
Not only
Yeah,
that,
I think
the regulator has actually came out, in a very, very wide, elaborative wording, all the events. That is the starting point, which actually says, if you read the regulation, it says all the events. Then it says which will have the bearing on the performance and the operations of the company. And again, they are also adding as well as the price sensitive information. And again, they are also saying somewhere it is likely to influence. So really, it is a very, very difficult job actually to think on the date of the notification. What are the agreements in place? What are the things which is required? What is persisting? What is going to influence? What is going to be? What is likely to be influenced? All the things is a hell of a lot of a job, really speaking. It is as Sudhakar puts it very correctly, it is only the collective minds of the people put together they have to do to start with.
In fact,
Right.
Randhir, I would like to mention one more thing also. I would like to seek your view on this. The materiality policy, what the companies have, I think it is high time for us to review those policies. And in view of these amendments, certain what's called as policy initiatives are to be mentioned in the policy itself, which will facilitate the company secretary or the key managerial personnel to identify, rationalize, and then take necessary action as far as the intimations are timely intimations are concerned. What do you say?
I agree. I agree, Sudhakar. And materiality policy is in public domain, and there is some limit to what internal processes you can put into it. But of course, all the companies, to ensure that there is timely disclosure, will have some internal policies to support the disclosure requirement, and then only it can be ensured. And now SEBI also requires that in the materiality policy, you mention exactly how the disclosure will be coming to company secretary and how such mechanism will work. But of course, what internally works and how you will ensure that disclosure comes in a timely manner. Because if you see this rumor requirement, which is going to be effective from 1st of October, there, of course, timeline is 24 hours, right? But consider a situation where some media is reporting midnight, early morning, right? So what kind of mechanism is going to work unless you are continuously monitoring the news articles and then taking a call that what exactly falls into the requirements of the provision, where clarification is required to be given by the company. So in a day, at least twice in 24 hours, you are receiving something, and then you have time to even review that what qualify for disclosure, and then you have to add the time that you make necessary disclosure. And internal committee which is going to review it, you may not have all the information as company secretary, because there are so many things happening, and then that will be reported by media, and then you will have some dependencies on people across organization, which may be in India, which may be far, say, time zone issues. So many other things will come into picture.
But Randhir, what I say, when we discuss the rumors, that point of time, we will elaborate it further. But as far as this agreement part is concerned, when we were suggesting a materiality policy, in fact, let me clarify that. See, that no doubt about it, the materiality policy, which we have to upload it on the website of the company, because that is in the public domain. But what I was trying to say is that there should be some internal policy, because every time company secretary cannot go and tap the door of each and every person. So there should be an internal guidelines, internal policy, wherein they have to say that these kind of agreements, if anyone is entering into in future, The company secretary is to be sensitized about that, and a copy of such agreements are to be provided to him. Some kind of this thing. So that what will happen is that kind of internal guidelines and policies will be binding all the people who are concerned with that. So according to me, because see, on an average, every day at least 1 to 2 calls I get on this regulation 30 only. My advice to all the participants who are the company secretaries of the listed company is that better to have an internal policy or internal guidelines in such a way the information should be flowed to you by the system without any kind of a human intervention. Of course, exceptions are there by default are there. At the same point of time, you may also tell the all concerned that wherever they need further clarifications, they may be in touch with the company secretary, who is the compliance officer. So that's why recently in one of the forums, I said very clearly, now, if you see that, in fact, where the 2-3 executive directors were there in the forum of one particular company, I said that very clearly. The days have gone where the compliance officer is solely responsible for compliances. Now a time has come, all the senior management, that might be one of the intention of SEBI, very clearly they are covering it. I'm really very happy about that. Even the senior management is also responsible for certain compliances. You take care of insider trading regulations, you take care of your listing regulations. Company secretary's role is getting shrunk. In fact, the other's role is getting enlarged. But no doubt about it, the Sutradhar is always the company secretary. So his position should not be vulnerable. So what my advice to all the company secretaries is, please do sensitize your boards, please do sensitize your seniors about the kind of changes what are coming in the listing regulations or in the other regulations, and ensure that your internal guidelines, internal policies in such a way, the system should work and not the people. Thank you.
Completely agree, Sudhakar. Internal policy guidelines is required, and I think companies will have this in place. We have this disclosure policy in place, and now when this amendment has come, there are a lot of changes required in it, and awareness has to be done to people. So, of course, without that, it is not possible, and it's a joint responsibility now. So that the time element, which is now very, very serious, I would say. Otherwise, you justify, right? So all good governed companies will have a process. This policy that you referred will help in a big way. And creating a policy is one thing. Implementing it in such a way that all the dots are connected, and senior management and senior management -1 or 2, all the plant heads and subsidiaries are so well connected that the information flow is something which becomes a culture. People do not have to think about when something happens, that how and whom to disclose, how this to be channelized. There is already a channel working in the organization, just that you switch that particular button and the information comes to you. That kind of process and system is going to help. Otherwise, it will break and you will not be able to comply.
Yeah, Kanchan, go ahead now. Over now, shift to the other part. Otherwise, we will not be able to finish.
Right, sir.
Yeah.
So a recent case study that I'd like to actually highlight here. In the Indian context, recent matters such as the hostile takeover of NDTV by the Adani Group and the Amazon Future Group dispute bring out the potential impact of this amendment. Prior to the takeover, the promoters of NDTV had entered into a loan agreement with an entity called Vishwa Pradhan Commercial Private Limited, VCPL. And the terms of this loan agreement also granted VCPL a right to exercise share warrants that would, upon exercise at the discretion of VCPL, amount to 99.99% of the equity share capital of NDTV's promoter company, RRPR Holding Private Limited, on a fully diluted basis. It was this agreement that ultimately facilitated Adani Group's hostile takeover of NDTV. Given that the listed company, in this case NDTV, was not party to this agreement, this would not ordinarily have warranted disclosure until the insertion of Regulation 30A. So moving on, materiality threshold for disclosures under Para B of Part A of Schedule 3. The LODR provides for certain set of events, and a listed company shall apply a materiality test to ascertain if such events are material enough to be disclosed. These events are mentioned in Para B, Part A of Schedule 3. As per Amendment Regulations 2023, the existing regulation 30.4.1AC has been replaced with a new construct which provides specific materiality thresholds for when such events need to be disclosed. So we all know that earlier the test of materiality was to observe the omission of an event or information which is likely to result in discontinuity or alteration of event or information already publicly available, or the omission of an event or information is likely to result in significant market reaction if the said omission came to light at a later date. In case where the criteria specified in the subclauses A and B are not applicable, an event or information may be treated as being material if, in the opinion of the board of listed company, it is considered material. The listed entities were also to maintain a materiality policy as per LODR, which were actually vaguely maintained. The new criteria for determining the materiality is very objective in nature. The listed company shall disclose any matter which is mentioned in Para B of Part A of Schedule 3, where the omission of an event or information whose value or the expected impact in terms of value exceeds the lower of the following: 2% of the turnover as per the last audited consolidated financial statements of the company, or 2% of net worth as per the last audited consolidated financials of the listed company, except in case the arithmetic value of the net worth is negative, or 5% of the average of absolute value of profit or loss after tax as per the last 3 audited consolidated financial statements of the listed company. See, what are the different areas that are now important under the materiality policy that the compliance officer needs to disclose? And how do you see the burden of compliance on the listed entities with this amendment?
I would say, of course, I would say the materiality policy now requires a lot to be amended, and most of the companies have included this percentage. What we have done is we have aligned this definition with the LODR and any amendment in it, in case SEBI comes up with any other changes, that is automated. Of course, this is going to be a big burden because number of disclosure is going to increase by number of times. For example, if earlier 5% or 10% was the materiality threshold, and say anything which was more than 500 crore was getting disclosed, maybe now 125, 140, 150 crore, depending on the company size and criteria, needs to be disclosed. And the items of disclosure also earlier before this amendment versus now has some impact. So of course, number of disclosure is going to increase. There has to be a very foolproof process, and despite that, there would be time when it will be tested, and it's going to be a burden completely.
Okay. See, according to me, that in case of Para B Part A, the regulator felt that the companies are not disclosing what they're expected to. Because wherever the materiality guidelines were to be made applicable, the companies used to say, as per the guidelines, okay, this is not a material information. Because there were no guidelines as such is stipulated. So according to that, everyone used to have their own way of interpreting that. So it was felt that in one way it is good for the company secretary that every time he don't need to scratch his head and he don't need to convince the people whether it is material or not material. Because always it is the company secretary who has to say, Bhaiya, it is material. Otherwise, he will be held accountable tomorrow by the regulator by why it is not material. He is the person who has to answer it. Others may say that no, it is not material, don't disclose it. But now at least some guidelines are there. But the only unfortunate part is, as Randhir has rightly mentioned, the 2% is a very meager amount. It should have been some bigger amount. Maybe at least, if not very big like 10%, at least it should have been 5%. And the second thing is that for the benefit of the participants, the third thing, the 5% of average of absolute value of profit or loss after tax. So this absolute value means what? Okay, that is very important to understand that. If you, for example, when they say it is the previous 3 audited consolidated financial statements, 1 year you have lost, 2 year you have profits, it is not to be netted off. You have to take that profit or loss, whatever it is, absolute values, you have to take it, then you have to average it out. Normally, the tendency is that people think that. In fact, okay, this is where I have received a few questions, that people used to ask me, that what is meant by absolute figures? Can I net it off or not? You cannot net it off, according to me. Absolute value of figures means that whether you have a loss, whether you have a profit, you have to accumulate all the 3 years divided by 3. That is your what's called as an absolute value of profit or loss after tax. One thing is very good thing is that I think sometimes SEBI also do a good drafting thing. They have used the word after tax. Otherwise, we would have been again that after tax or before tax. If they not said that, again, we would have interpreted that before tax only. Some people say it is after tax. But fortunately here, they are very clearly given that it is after tax. So not an issue at all. So in fact, I would like to suggest one more thing, Randhir. I will seek your view on this. Is normally when this for the materiality thing is under Regulation 30, board used to authorize that normally the KMPs, like your CEO, CFO, and company secretary, to determine the materiality of the events and information which need to be informed to the stock exchanges. I think now, because of these modifications of the guidelines, this listing regulations, it is a time now better to also involve some other senior management people also, apart from the key managerial persons only. Whether they are KMPs or not, it is immaterial. But better you have to involve other people also, because these 3, if the KMPs cannot determine the materiality of the events, even other senior managements are also to be involved in this. What's your view on this?
I agree, Sudhakar. You touched upon 2-3 things. So number one, which was on absolute value, I think SEBI has now clarified in their circular of July 13 that netting off means what, and they have given a very good illustration also by giving 2 negative profit in 2 years and 1 positive profit, and then coming at the average. In fact, they've also clarified that now, in case demerger deteriorate, you don't have 3 years, then number of years which is available, that is relevant. So you rightly pointed out that. And of course, it's not the 1, 2, or 3 KMPs who will be able to always determine or will be available actually to help on whether it is material or not. Even when this was not defined in this very clear way, that 2% or 5% is material, I think every company had their materiality threshold, maybe internal or maybe external. And there was a process internally working. So I would say that we have a disclosure committee, and of course, law says that this determination authority is with KMP. But there are people who are actually involved, and they would have first understanding, and then probably KMP will come to know that this particular thing is happening. This is the amount of this particular transaction. So involvement of them is very, very important. And internal committee kind of thing will help organization to come at this materiality threshold, because 2% is very easy. But how you compute it? In many scenarios, computation is very, very difficult. And sometimes, in fact, view of auditor is also required, right? For example, if you were, say, selling one plant, which is part of a subsidiary, right? So you have turnover of the subsidiary. Maybe the plant individually also has their profit, turnover, net worth, and the way it is structured outside India, it may also have an impact. So it becomes very, very complex many times to arrive at the number which you will again check whether this meets the threshold or not. So having people minus KMP will always be helpful.
In fact, I'm seeing that one suggestion given by Mr. Pushkar that please keep the discussion in brief and to the point in the interest of time to discuss issues. Let me tell you, Pushkar, one thing very clearly, that if we are not able to complete the presentation today, we will have the remaining portion in the next week. We will do that. But these things we have to discuss, and okay, we cannot say to the point. We need to explain the things at the point of time. We have to also what's called discuss about the action points as far as the company secretary is concerned. Otherwise, what will happen? The purpose of these webinars from Mehta and Mehta is not to just hold a webinar on the issue. It is not the objective. Objective is to give the guidance to the participants. Suppose as a company secretary, how you have to address these issues. So it may require some kind of a discussion. So at the cost of the time, let us not compromise the discussions because of the time factor. If we are not able to complete it, by all means, we can have another webinar maybe next week in continuation of this particular one. Am I correct, Dipti?
Yeah, and there are many questions. For managing time, we are not taking, but we will cover each and every question. And there are many questions. As in the starting, I only told that so many industries, so many kind of company has their typical practical problem, whether I should do this or not do this. So we are allowing all the questions to come. So that's why we will attend all the questions. It may require us to spill over to next week also. It's not an issue. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another thing is there, if you actually go through, the item number 8 of the part A of the Schedule 3 of the LODR regulation, it is regarding the events of information regarding to litigation, disputes, and regulatory actions, etc., and other things. Some other, unfortunately, what happens is in these cases, they are not specified any threshold or monetary limit, which is actually triggering up the disclosure of this litigation, etc. As I read the regulation, as it appears by plain reading, it says we need to intimate anything including the petty demand of the disputed liability. Do you think there is any limit will be prescribed by the SEBI, anything is expected, etc., and other things and all of this? Because today, if I go to the plain regulation, it says everything. That means even the petty demand is also to be informed, disclosure.
See, according to me, you have to apply materiality test. You cannot just put it everything in that. Though it is not clarified, but at the end of the day, according to me, we have to see what is Regulation 30 because it talks about materiality. In fact,
correct. You're right. It is talked about materiality.
Several people are asking that suppose if an imposition of a fine of 1,000 rupees because you have not put a dustbin outside your what's called as workshop or something like that, that is all very trivial things, but over a period of time it settled down. But according to me, even if it is there under 30A also mandatory, these things you have to inform about any kind of imposition of fines and all. That doesn't mean that we will go to that extreme. But if you want to inform, by all means, yes, dump that stock exchanges with loads and loads of these kind of things.
No,
that is not the way it is.
No, that is not the point. Because somewhere you are given the threshold, somewhere you are set others, but when
I
agree. You use the word all.
I agree.
But what Sudhakar said makes sense. A penny or maybe 100, 500.
Yeah, correct. That is
what is intended.
Yeah.
Right? So maybe internal threshold has to be put, and then probably this will become norm.
Maybe SEBI might come out with some sort of a limit or threshold, etc., and all things. That also is possible.
Yeah, I think a lot of representation has happened, and this is one area where some clarification will be helpful.
Yeah. Yes, Kanchan.
Events or information that previously escaped disclosure due to the subjective disclosure criteria, they are now disclosable if they meet the new objective criteria and they are subsisting. This will require listed entities and their compliance officers to undertake a review of all undisclosed matters involving the listed entity and assess afresh whether they now become disclosable. In undertaking such review, it may be helpful to also refer to SEBI's circular dated September 9, 2015, which provides guidance on when information becomes disclosable. So moving on, the amendment regulations 2023, they have inserted a proviso to regulation 3011 of the LODR, as per which the top 100 listed companies with effect from 1st of October 2023 and thereafter top 250 listed companies with effect from 1st of April 2024 shall have to mandatorily confirm, deny or clarify any reported event or information in mainstream media on any of the matters dealt with in Regulation 30 of the LODR. Confirmation, denial, or clarification shall only be required if the reported event or information is not general in nature and which indicates that rumors of an impending specific material event or information are circulating amongst the investing public. It must also be done not later than 24 hours from the reporting of the event or information. So the proviso clarifies that the top 100 listed companies and top 250 listed companies shall be determined on the basis of market capitalization as at the end of immediately preceding financial year. So the amendment regulations 2023 also provide for a definition of mainstream media. So if we correctly understand, as per the definition, mainstream media shall include newspapers registered with the Registrar of Newspaper for India, news channels permitted by Ministry of Information and Broadcasting under the Government of India, content published by the Publisher of News and Current Affairs content as defined under the Information Technology Rules 2021. Newspapers or news channels or news and current affairs content similarly registered or permitted or regulated as the case may be in jurisdictions outside India. So it is pertinent to note that the definition of mainstream media as per the amendment regulations 2023 has been kept very wide, and it specifically includes the content published by the publisher of news and current affairs content as defined under the IT rules 2021, and also for any of the news that comes into picture for jurisdictions outside India. So with this, I think there is a point of deliberation here that do you anticipate upsurge in the articles that would be written in the near future for the listed companies, and the need for a strong vigilance mechanism needs to be put in place?
You are right, Kanchan. I think this definition is inclusive. And beside these four, the provision says mainstream media are included. So it's not an exhaustive definition, anything, and it will add a lot of burden. Anyway, a lot of articles are printed, and now with this provision, earlier also I would say that there were a lot of things printed intentionally, and now with this provision, there is onus on company that they track and then they disclose. They either accept, deny, or clarify on the news item, and significance is of the timeline, and that's very obvious that in case the news has played its role, then there is no purpose of clarification. So where from SEBI has come, that's also I think is the right move. Provision was always there. Now it is more strict and requires that there is a proper process framework is placed internally in the organization. Most of the companies, I would say the communication team, which is generally dealing with media houses and having a repository of all the news an article which is published for the company. Now their role has to be enhanced. They have to track it more minutely, and then there has to be a process where you determine whether this requires clarification or disclosure to exchange or not. So that process needs to be built, and that will help.
In fact, according to me, this particular we all know that whenever the stock exchanges used to question about the news items, the standard reply what the companies used to give was, as per the policy of the company, we don't comment on the market rumors. Those days now have gone. You cannot simply say that. You have to say either yes or no or clarify it. But it is not that simple to say no, because the moment you say no, it is going to bind you. And it may down the line, maybe after 1 week or 2 weeks, when you disseminate the information, if something happens, then obviously the regulator may catch you there. So because it cannot happen in such a short time or something, so something is there, so you have to clarify it. What they say is, suppose, for example, if that rumor, whatever it is there, if it is yes, no doubt about it, you confirm that. And whatever the status as on that particular date, you may say that, look, something is happening, but it is not a very advanced stage, something like that, you have to clarify it. Again, the same thing, it is not that simple. One of the reasons might be that earlier some companies, we all know that very well, used to give selectively leak the information. And when it gets published, used to say that, look, we don't want to comment on the market rumors. So SEBI is not happy with this. I mean, the regulator is not happy with this kind of a situation. That might be one of the reasons for this. But the problem is, as Randhir has rightly mentioned, that it is an inclusive definition, number one. And number two, it is also covering that not only the national mainstream media, but also is worldwide. In fact, it says that newspapers or news channels or news current affairs, etc., registered or permitted and regulated as the case may be in jurisdictions outside India. So this is the major worry, is that sometimes it may so happen about your company, a news item got published in a God forbidden country, in a God forbidden language, and you may not even find a translator. What is that information about?
Yeah.
And you have to comment about it. How you will be able to do that? Really, that is not that simple to say that, number one. Number two, if you have to really comply with this particular regulation, you have to have a separate department. I'm sure that, of course, major companies do have corporate communications department, but their profile is not this vast. Now the corporate communications department role is to be further enhanced and increased. By now, you have to keep your eyes and ears open 24/7. Earlier, it was only maybe from 10 to 8 or 9 in the evening. That's it. But now it is 24/7. Where what is happening in which corner of the world about your company, if something is happening, you have to keep it. Fortunately, what they did was, it is made applicable to 100 top listed companies based on the market cap from 1st October. But even the 100 companies also, according to me, it is very difficult. Maybe top 10, 25, 50 companies, it would have been slightly easier. But now you say that top 250 companies from 1st April. Again, it is going to be very difficult. That it may look like the top 250 can do it, but it is not that simple, according to me. But having said that, since we are left with no option but to comply with, again, the same thing, it is the company secretaries of these companies, they have to strategize how this particular compliance is to be ensured. And similarly, that enough sensitization is to be happened as far as the corporate communications department is concerned. Now they have to play a very key role in this.
So on a lighter note, sir, is this like SEBI's attempt or the government's attempt to provide employment in the country for vigilance people then?
No, whatever it is, but one thing is very clear. As Sudhakar puts it somewhere, a company which is situated at Bombay, some news item getting published somewhere far east of the country or far north of the country, etc., and all this thing. What is the mechanism by which you will actually come to know there is a news item is appearing about your company? That itself is a marathon task to get to know the thing. That is one. Second thing is he touched upon the overseas jurisdiction. Overseas jurisdiction, it's a fact. We have many companies where I worked. The minutes are required to be written in their acceptable language. That means, when I've been working in Equatorial Guinea, it was to be written in Spanish language. Similarly, when I was working in somewhere in some of the African countries, like Democratic Republic of Canada, it was actually in French language. Where we take up the job, etc., we are not aware of this language. We are actually depending upon the translators, right translations. All these issues are going to be very difficult because it is not a very easy job, as Sudhakar puts it. But only luckily, it is not implemented for all the companies. It is selectively initially. But days are not far away. It will be implemented the face manner to other companies as well. Randhir, what is the mechanism you have actually in your group of companies on this?
I was also supposed to ask.
Yeah. So I would say that corporate communication team was tracking news item and those which had some bearing, they were already sharing with us. But yes, the periodicity was not as stringent as the SEBI now intend we to have. And of course, when you track media news items, and when you are a global company and you have subsidiary across globe, it becomes more a marathon task for the corporate communication team. And even for top 100 companies, it's going to be tough, right? And what mechanism will work, that finger crossed. Of course, tracking on a regular basis is something that that has to be implemented. And we are hopeful that considering the right intent, maybe if there are hundreds of such news items, not all will be important. And if your intent is right and the framework is working, system is working, you would have successful reporting on this.
I would like to share one thing here. 30 years back, when this regulation was not there, in one of the company where I was working, they were all working towards the massive reconstruction, reorganization after the globalization, which has actually happened. This company had about 5 manufacturing units. They are actually virtually decided to close down the 4 manufacturing unit and open one more manufacturing unit. This was actually very, very confidentially kept information at the top level, which people were not aware. Some of the company, very few people were there. I think, one of the social gathering, I think some person seemed to have been spoken loosely. And there was one analyst, I remember if I can name the name, it was actually, I think, Ask Raymond. Those people actually published the news item. This company has got a plan to close down this 4 units. This is what they are going to have, this, that, etc. Some news item has appeared by them. When this appeared by them, I have been actually summoned by the board of directors. And the chairman was very unhappy, very annoyed, because I am one of the party who knows this. So he told me, how can it be, Bala? You were there in the meeting. Without you, how can it be? Who would have told? What is this nonsense? What is going on? At such a confidential information, all the things we've been taken for the ride. I told them, this is the thing. He wanted to get the meeting arranged by those people. We called the people. 3 of them, they came actually. When we discussed and other things and all, they said, no, we heard that, etc. and all. My chairman was very clear. Sorry, there is nothing like that. I want a publication from you immediately denying what you published is wrong. They did that actually. But down the line, after 5 years, I happened to meet the same people on one of the flight where we were traveling. By that time, the company actually executed closed on the unit. They asked me a question. Bala, when we wrote about this report first time, when you people made us for a task and asking them to buy a denial, etc. and all, today what happened? What did we did wrong? Why did you do all these things without accepting that particular day? This question was asked to me at that particular time. But I did not have the answer because after all, company's policy, they wanted to keep it confidential. Today, those things are not going to be possible. Sudhakar puts it very clearly. Either you accept or you deny or you give the clarification.
Right. I think any UPSI which is there, that needs to be disclosed to exchange, and there is a mechanism, and in case it's published or analyzed or anywhere it is going and it reflects somewhere, companies were responding. Now this is one step beyond that, and what you say in media, what exactly is picked up, monitoring those, and timely responding, taking care of this provision is going to be a Herculean task for any company and whatever size it may be.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Just as a caution, I would like to add it further is that SEBI is in the process of connecting Regulation 32 insider trading regulations, also unpublished price sensitive information. So that is going to definitely going to add further burden on the corporates, certainly, because whatever you are doing it here, the moment you say whether it is para A or para B, whatever it may be, the moment you're intimating it to the stock exchanges, definitely you have to ensure immediately that compliance as far as your insider trading regulations are concerned and SDD is concerned in particular. So Randhir, in fact, just a two-liner again from you as far as this particular aspect is concerned.
Board permanency?
No, about the Regulation 30 with the insider trading regulations, as far as unpublished price sensitive information is concerned. You know that they are in the process of, there is the consultation paper.
Yeah. So I would say,
definition.
Yeah, I would take help of what you said earlier in this deliberation, that this threshold has helped in a way that it has removed the so always there is a issue that whether it is UPSI or only material, right? And of course UPSI definition is there, but impact on share price is something that you are always watchful of. So if some definition is coming, if some clarity is coming, I think that would help in better compliance.
Sure.
At the cost of course, more burden of compliance.
So that only that's why I said it is as a caution that whenever any kind of action the company secretaries are taking as far as the Reg 30 is concerned, the same point of time, see the repercussions as far as your insider trading regulations compliances are concerned, and in particular SDD compliances are concerned.
Right.
Yeah, Kanchan.
So moving on to board permanency. Regulation 17(1)D has been inserted to the LODR by the Amendment Regulations 2023, according to which from 1st of April 2024, directors of listed companies will require shareholder approval in a general meeting at least once in 5 years from the date of appointment or reappointment. Additionally, in case there is a director on the board of a listed company, as on 31st of March 2024, who has served on the board of the listed company for 5 years or more without shareholder approval, such person's continuation on the board shall be subject to shareholder approval in the first general meeting after 31st of March 2024, barring the exceptions mentioned under the regulations, like the whole-time director, managing director, or nominee director. So barring these exceptions, it is going to be applicable to all the other directors. So do you see shareholder activism rising in the Indian listed space with these changes? And how should the companies gear up to this significant change, as we see many permanent boards in the industry?
I think definitely shareholder activism is already increasing in India, and it's not at par with Western countries. But yes, it is not what it used to be 10 years back. And contribution to SEBI, like majority minority decision, prohibiting related parties from voting. So those have already contributed. And I see that it has worked well for overall governance ecosystem in India. And companies have become more resilient in terms of what they're proposing and doing in terms of what matters to minority shareholders. And this also, I think, is a very genuine provision. I personally feel that this is completely okay.
In fact, from my side, I would like to say that at one point of time, there was the provisions of SEBI listing regulations were not in alignment with Companies Act. Some exemptions given there were taken out from here, some given here was taken out from there. That point of time between, I remember 2016 to 2018, that 2 years we made a lot of representations and SEBI brought a lot of regulations in alignment with the Companies Act. But of late, it seems to be again, it is drifting out of that alignment with the Companies Act provisions, and this is one of that. If you see under the Companies Act, 1/3 of the board can be of permanent directors who are not liable to retire by rotation. So most of the times what happens is the promoters and the senior most people that they used to hold the board permanency. Now, when you say that board permanency every once in 5 years, you have to go to this thing. Apart from that, shareholder activism or proxy advisories, this thing is proxy advisories may question why permanent this thing and all, no doubt about it. Certain things maybe say that governance point of view, this is not correct, but always you cannot question that whether it is governance point of view or not. Sometimes we have to give that benefit of doubt or whatever we may say. But now here the question comes when you are going to appoint a promoter who is an executive director also, who is holding a permanent position. No doubt about it, as a managerial person, his appointment and his remuneration is coming to the shareholders' approval once in 5 years because you can't appoint him beyond 5 years. That is different to that of board permanency. Now, when you are appointing, he is a related party, suppose. And now that majority of the minority vote is required. So there will be some kind of uncomfortability among the corporates that when you are having that board, the permanent directors have to come once in a 5 years to the shareholders. But of course, this, though it is not a very big issue as such, according to me. But yes, no doubt about it, a privilege given to the under the Companies Act has been taken out under the listing regulations. But of course, sometimes that SEBI, in fact, earlier at one point of time in one of the forums, one of the SEBI official told me that look, listed companies ought to be regulated in a higher pedestal.
Right.
I can take that answer and I can say, okay, it's fine, not an issue as such. Yeah.
So with this, do you also see that, we need to, the directors should be having, the board should be having more informed directors on board, as in the kind of responsibility that is being given onto them by SEBI is kind of increasing with these kind of changes.
So that is always
their
there.
performance.
That is always there. They say that board of directors always ought to be having experience, maturity, wisdom, business acumen, so many things, whether the Companies Act or listing regulations are there or not there. But if you see that the primary responsibility of the board of directors, forget about the legalities. The primary responsibility of the board of directors is to ensure that the shareholders and other stakeholders of the company who are connected to the company are to get benefited because of that. And whatever the actions they are doing it should be for the benefit of the company. So the moment you take a person on the board, you are taking him with some kind of an expectations. Say, for example, duties of directors. For the first time, it was specified in the 166 of Companies Act. Prior to that, in the Companies Act, nowhere duties of directors was there. That doesn't mean the directors have no duties. They were having fiduciary responsibilities. So that's why that this particular amendment is not increasing or decreasing anything as far as the board is concerned. The only thing is, yes, they say that the permanency should not be there. It may that now the once in 5 years, any kind of special privileges given to anybody, those have to come out. In one way, if you see governance point of view, no doubt about it, is a good initiative.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Kanchan, go ahead.
Yes, as you rightly say, director responsibility all along has been there actually. For the first time, it has been put. For example, if the code of conduct has been provided, does it mean there was no code of conduct earlier? Anyway, they are bound to do it. Only thing is, regulation has brought it in writing today. That's all.
Yes, one pertinent case law here worth mentioning is in the case of Dish TV Limited. 3 months prior to its listing in 2007, Dish TV Limited amended its articles of association by passing of a board resolution for appointment of Mr. Jawahar Goyal as an additional director, not liable to rotation. On the same day, in 2007, he was also appointed as the managing director of the company. In the annual general meeting of 2022, the shareholders of Dish TV Limited, such as Yes Bank, holding substantial majority in the company, they rejected the candidature of Mr. Goyal as a managing director. However, due to the aforesaid clause within the Articles of Association and other legal issues, Mr. Goyal agreed to step down as the managing director only after a long-drawn legal battle with Yes Bank that was adjudicated by the Bombay High Court. So similarly, in the case of JK Cements, minority shareholders had rejected a resolution in 2021 wherein the company proposed to amend its Articles of Association to provide a lifetime tenure to the promoter directors of the company. So moving on, approval of special rights to shareholders. Regulation 31B(1) has been inserted by the Amendment Regulations 2023 in order to subject any special rights granted to any set of shareholders of a listed company to shareholders' approval by a special resolution once in every 5 years, beginning from the date on which such special rights has been granted. Any such special rights available as on the date of coming into force of the amendment regulations is to be subject to shareholders' approval by a special resolution within 5 years from the date of coming into force of the amendment regulations. So the exceptions are this approval is not required in case of any special rights granted to a registered financial institution and a registered debenture trustee, if either of these become shareholders owing to the lending arrangements or debenture subscription agreements. Notably, the scope of the term special rights, it has not been defined. So how would the existing listed companies be impacted with this kind of change? So would there be an impact on the companies which are gearing up for IPOs in the near future?
I think many startup companies who got listed recently had this special right given to the promoter, and this provision is to deal with such scenario where shareholders' equity is not continued once you are listed. So before listing, when you're private, public, it's altogether a different scenario. Once you are listed and you get investment from shareholders outside those who are in control of management, it becomes necessary that there is a fair game where at least people who are investing, they have a right to vote. They have right to vote and they have right to continue or come out of this investment. So I think SEBI intent here is that those things in next 5 years should come to shareholders, and there is fair opportunity given to those who are outside the management and control of the company.
I agree with that with your Randhir. In fact, as the private equity partners or the angel investors in startup companies in particular, similarly joint venture companies in normal course, they used to have these kind of special privileges. And I think according to me, this is a good initiative of SEBI that once in 5 years, it has to come to the shareholders' notice and they need to approve that. Kanchan, just see that 1 minute. Can just see that your further slides are pertaining to Regulation 30 or
yes, sir.
Regulation 30?
Yes, sir, 30. We've got 30 also, sir.
Okay.
So, Sudhakar, do you think before 30 we'll take the earlier questions or we'll take?
Yeah. Because that's what I was asking. Let us confine that, because Kanchan, if I'm not wrong, has some slides other than Regulation 30. So Kanchan, take only those slides which are pertaining to Regulation 30. Let us discuss that only. Okay. Otherwise, we've already taken up that earlier.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So moving on for the timelines for disclosure. The amendment regulations has revamped the timelines for disclosure of material events by the board of a listed company. Prior to this amendment, the timeline for disclosure was as soon as reasonably possible, but not later than 24 hours from the occurrence of the event or information. Additionally, in case of delay in disclosing within the 24 hours, the listed company also had to provide the reasons for delay. The amendment regulations now provide for a more segregated and detailed timeline for disclosure based on the nature of event or information. Under Regulation 36, the revised timelines, as we see, are in case the event or information arises from the board meeting of the listed company or a decision pertaining to the event or information is taken in the board meeting of the listed company, then you need to make a disclosure within 30 minutes from the closure of the meeting of the board. In case the event or information emanates from within the listed company, then disclosure needs to be made from 12 hours, within 12 hours from the occurrence of the event or information. In case the event or information does not emanate from within the listed company, then we have 24 hours from the occurrence of the event or information. So, if we correctly understand the new age digital media, the regulators are also taking steps to keep pace with the changing environment, because everything around us is digitizing. I think the idea of SEBI also is to speed up the timelines required for disclosure.
Completely
Yeah,
agree.
exactly.
And I think
Yeah.
COVID has contributed to it. In 2 years, people working completely digital, they have developed a mechanism which to some extent helps in reaching to the information and will help in making this disclosure. But 12 hours from occurrence of the event or information when it is emanating from within the company is something that's challenging, and particularly when you are having operation across globe and things are happening internally in the company, but it's happening at odd hours, and maybe keeping a track and making a disclosure within 12 hours is something which may be difficult at time. But I think expectation is that the company secretary office is 24/7.
Yeah, that is it. That is exactly the point. This is going to be 24/7, 365 days a week.
Yeah, so it's like law and order things in the city. It's a law and order in the organization, and you have like police station things which is working 24 hours.
Yeah, very right.
Someone is there who is taking the calls, looking at the email, getting and reviewing the news articles, and then accordingly helping to be in compliance.
See, in addition to that, one more thing is of late happening is people have shifted from print media to electronic media. Now, many of the people are shifting from electronic media to digital media. Digital media means your podcasts and your blogs and all these things. This is also happening. So whether podcasts and blogs will come under the regulations or not, that is, there is a very finer point. Okay, that cross line is there, because somebody may pick up some news item and he may do a podcast on this thing. Now, can you say it is digital media, it is not electronic media, I'm not covered in that? You may not be able to say that. Certainly it is to be, you have to comment about that. Similarly, somebody may write a blog about your company. Can we say that it is not a part of electronic media, print media, and I will talk about that? May not be possible. So, according to me, even if it is not clearly covered as such, but podcasts as well as blogs may also be keep a watch on that.
Agree, Sudhakar. And in fact, all written news and article to some extent, nothing is easy, but yes, to some extent, getting to it and reviewing it is easy, versus broadcast and news reading, which like 24/7, you're watching all the channels, you are hearing all the broadcast, right? Or otherwise you are getting to it and then you are reporting. In that case, within 24 hours of the occurrence of the information or event is something that you will not be able to comply.
Correct.
Yes, sir. So moving on, extension of timelines on the applicability of the amendment regulations to high value listed debt entities. We had already done a webinar in detail on this particular amendment. However, just a cursory glance on this. The 2021 amendments to the LODR had made the obligations under Chapter 4 applicable to...
Kanchan, why can't you skip these things and all? Because there are a lot of questions out there, because we have already covered this. You skip those things. Please.
Introduction of new disclosure obligations under Para A and B of Part A of Schedule 3 of LODR. So disclosure in relation to any agreement entered into by a stakeholder of a listed company or its holding subsidiary or associate company that has an impact on the management or control of the listed company or imposes any restriction or liability on the listed company. A disclosure in relation to resignation of any KMP, senior management, compliance officer or director other than any independent director, along with the letter of resignation and detailed reason for resignations within 7 days from such resignation coming into effect, a disclosure needs to be made.
So here the new addition is senior management again. So
Yes,
that means the senior management's resignation along with the copy of their resignation letter, it has to be intimated to the exchange. And again, the same thing, there is no, and they may have to quote the reason why they are resigning and all those things. So here, definitely some kind of sensitivity will be there. That how we will handle it and all, it's really difficult.
I think we were one of the earliest company to be impacted of this provision. One of the senior management was moving away, and the notification was immediately coming into effect. And we made a disclosure, and the LODR does not require, because you have already intimated about directors, KMP, auditors. Those details are there on exchanges also. But senior management is one area which was a disclosure requirement for SEC. And if you are listed outside India, you have disclosed in your 20F the names of senior management, but not in India. So on our own, what we did, we disclosed the list of senior management to the exchanges. And then we also intimated this. This was within, I think, a week of this notification coming into light. But these are easy go. You can do it and do compliances rather easily.
See, here what happens is, when I say that there are some sensitivity involved in the case of senior management, see, KMPs are only hardly supposable. There are three positions out there, like your CEO, CFO, and the company secretary. Whereas senior management, you never know that, depending upon the size of the organizations, the list may go on. And now what happens is you have to intimate that resignation. And he may be persuaded subsequently within the notice period, and he will be withdrawing his resignation. In the meantime, if you are intimating the stock exchange, again, you have to intimate about his withdrawal of the resignation, and all these things create some kind of a confusion in the market. And similarly, your competitor will keeping a watch on you, and he will coming to know about everything. So this senior management thing is slightly, in fact, I don't know why SEBI has brought in here. It should not have been in the interest of the company, at least. That's what my personal view is.
You are right, Sudhakar. Actually, in many times, what happened, the company, when the senior management submit the resignation to his boss says, no, let us hold on, we will discuss it out. He keeps it pending. It is never come to the disclosure at all. When you are talking here about 7-type disclosure, etc., and other thing, and all, first thing is it happens like that. Maybe he is able to pursue it, another thing, it doesn't happen. It happens only after 20 days. But the resignation stands from the effect of the date. So by the time to come to the late on 20th day, then there is a non-compliance of non-communication within 7 days. Yes, you are right. Actually, these all problems are going to be there in practically.
So moving on, disclosure in relation to any event where the managing director.
Just 1 minute, Kanchan. Just 1 minute, Kanchan. Dipti, now we have to decide, because it is already 12:45. We have 15 minutes more. So should we take up the questions based on the discussion?
So we are done, sir.
Okay, you're done? Okay. Oh, then it's good. I was thinking. Okay. Okay,
Yes,
then fine.
Kanchan has been very efficient.
I thought some more slides are there. Okay.
No, sir. Just 2 more slides will be done, sir.
Okay.
So,
Good.
So briefly discussing the other disclosures that are necessary now. Disclosure in relation to any event where the managing director or chief executive officer of a listed company was indisposed or unavailable to fulfill the requirements of the role in a regular manner for more than 45 days in any rolling period of 90 days. This has to be disclosed along with the reason for such indispensability or unavailability. Disclosure in relation to any announcement or communication through social media intermediaries.
Just one minute. That Randhir, what is your view about this particular disclosure about the CEO's indisposability? It is his personal
in
domain.
fact-
It is that you are entering into his personal domain. Am I correct?
Yeah, I agree, but I see that there was a disclosure on exchange. CFO was not there, approachable, contactable, and the company has given already this disclosure. So even I was thinking maybe this is out of place or going in personal domain. But think a situation where key management persons are responsible for the organization, and LODR casts a lot of responsibility on them. And for some reason, if the KMP is not contactable by the company, then that disclosure is something becomes very important for the investor, and it should be there. I see that it's in right place. Maybe very rare
Randhir,
cases.
I take it in a different way. Say, for example, you take the case of Steve Jobs. That poor guy was suffering from some disease and he was to be hospitalized frequently from time to time. Now, what happens is there in such case that even if a person is indisposable, the CEO or whoever it is, that company would have had its own ways and means to, doing the job. But now you are putting about his indisposability on the public domain.
I think very clear intent of SEBI is that KMP should be responsible and should be available. And 45 days is a time. If the KMP is not available, that at least disclosure should be there in the mainstream the exchange, and investors should know it.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Kanchan.
So disclosure in relation to any announcement or communication through social media intermediaries or mainstream media by directors, promoters, KMPs, or senior management of a listed company in relation to any event or information which is material for the listed company and is not already made available in the public domain.
I think Bala already spoke about it.
Yeah.
A very good example.
Yes, sir. Should we move on?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Disclosure in relation to any action that is initiated or any order passed by any regulatory, statutory, enforcement authority or a judicial body against the listed company or its directors, KMPs, senior management, promoter, or a subsidiary in relation to a listed company. The orders or actions might be in relation to any of the following: a search or seizure or reopening of accounts under Section 130 of Companies Act, or investigation under the provisions of Chapter 14 of Companies Act. Then a disclosure needs to be made.
This also we briefly touched upon.
Right, sir. So some other amendments introduced include the requirement of providing ESG disclosures.
I think these are not covered with Regulation 30,
Right, sir.
Are there Regulation 30 things? This slide? I don't think so.
No, this is not 30. This is
not Regulation 30. Let us skip it.
Yeah,
Let us skip it, Kanchan.
Yes, sir.
Next.
That's it, sir. We are done.
Okay. Now,
Okay.
Bala, you may take the questions which are there on the comment box.
Chat and then question are taken.
Yeah, what we are not covered, only those may be taken up.
Will you please allow the nature of the agreement? Type of agreement will fall in this category. I think we discussed that. Agreement invariably the business agreement which refer inter alia NDA clause. As such, it may be slightly difficult to provide a copy of the agreement under Regulation 30. Please clarify.
No, you may be having difficulty, but if it is a mandate, then you have to comply with. That's it.
Yeah, you know to actually apply those tests, and if it is falling under that, there is no other way than to comply with it.
Agreement always says except regulatory requirement. This is regulatory requirement compliance. So you have to do it.
Pending civil case in the city civil court with the venture of arbitration proceeding before arbitration council, do we need to report?
If it falls within 20, of course, the disclosure is required.
Yeah, it is because again those tests which is affecting materiality, even significance, all those tests need to be applied here. That's what I think so.
I think clause 20 is very clear.
Yeah. Suppose the legal department has not conveyed the details, if failed to give the information regarding the agreement, which is material. No, this we discussed because company cannot escape. Company has to ensure that comes. Would it include the disclosure of the company lease agreements undertaken in the residential needs of the employee?
That is the ordinary course of business.
What is the binding agreement for employees who are not KMP and SMP?
This also we have discussed later.
Yeah. Agreement entered in the promoter or binding on the listed entity. The promoter entered into any loan agreement with the banks or any other company, and listed entity makes a default in making the payment, which may hamper the borrowing of the listed entity as per the interest rate rating concern. So will it be covered under regulation 30A?
See, anyway, promoter, whenever he is pledging his securities for borrowing the money, okay, the only thing is that certainly it is going to have impact on the company, because tomorrow, God forbids, if he is not able to repay and the pledgee invoke the pledge, then what will happen? There will be a change in the control of the company. So that is the reason actually in the shareholding pattern also, and in case of insider trading regulations also, the pledge becomes, it falls under the definition of trading, and it is to be intimated.
In case of receiving an order, not in the ordinary course of the business, rate with the threshold as provided in the 30A, should we disclose each and every order which crosses the threshold, because the order received by the company crossing these thresholds are usually in the ordinary course of business only.
Then you will take that?
In case of the receiving an order, not in the ordinary course of the business, reduce the threshold as provided in regulation 34. Should we have to disclose each and every order which crosses the threshold? Because the order received by the company crossing the thresholds are usually in ordinary course of the business only, which is talking.
Anyway, there is a regulation, sub-regulation 12, which says that any other things which may have a material effect on the organization that needs to be disclosed. What is material effect on the organization is a very, very wide term. So what is not mandatory, that can also fall there. And in case it is not falling there, then it becomes voluntary disclosure.
If the article of a company already provided a special right to the promoter company group, would such right need ratification once in every 5 years? If yes, the whole purpose of having the right already embedded in the AOA would become null. I think you discussed this actually.
Yeah, your articles will not supersede, that act, the listing regulations. They are subservient to that. That's why you have to take that.
Announcement to the social media by the director needs to be disclosed as per the new announcement of the social media by director need to be disclosed as per the new requirement. If it is not obligation of the company to be informed to the stock exchanges.
Of course, if it is UPSI and that needs to be first disclosed to exchange and it has been disclosed to the social media, it will have an impact, and necessary disclosure and compliance has to be done by the company. For
past litigation, there have been a disclosure by the corporates in the various formats. Since there is no prescribed format, some of them are clubbed on the basis of the forum, some are clubbed basis of the nature, some have been the specific litigation. This has led to varied disclosure practices. Any thoughts?
Sorry, I missed the question. Sudhakar,
same with me. I'm not able to understand the question.
No, they are saying for the past litigation, there have been disclosure by the corporates in the various formats, since there is no prescribed format.
Yeah. So
some of them, some of them have been clubbed on the basis of the forum, some of them clubbed on the basis of the nature, some of them have been clubbed on the basis of the litigation. So what are your thoughts? That's a question.
I think already if disclosure is already done by the company, SEBI intent is not to have duplication of those disclosures, right? But what is exactly disclosure and whether it meets the requirements of SEBI disclosure format, because there are a lot of disclosure for which SEBI has specified that what needs to be disclosed. Then in that case, I don't think that duplication is required. But in case there is any gap, then probably company needs to take a call that it has to be disclosed.
No, I do not know, because probably my thought will be little different here. Because when you say the past, there have been disclosure in corporate in the various formats and the various things like that, you say. Now, for example, in the auditor's report, one has to really give what are the pending litigation, etc., regarding the income tax, etc., and other things, which comes in the annual financial statement. So it does not mean it is a disclosure, because now SEBI has come out very categorically the materiality disclosure. So those disclosure which have been made there, that cannot be taken as a disclosure made, because it is only annual statement which is actually published as a routine course. You are filing it. It is not a specific intimation to the SEBI. I think you have to actually go by the regulation what has come today, and according to that, you have to take a call. You have to disclose, in my opinion.
Correct.
Disclosure received from the promoter that merely is a family arrangement, which does not impact the listed entity. Now, this is responsibility to verify whether they are impacting or not. Whose responsibility? Company secretary. Sudhakar has elaborately discussed this matter. Because company secretary has to actually find out the sensitivities, he has to actually make the sure, he has to analyze. Of course.
Yeah. And if there is no
and
if there is no impact, these 4 ingredients are not attracted, then disclosure is not warranted.
I think, Dipti, that's all I think. So here I can see.
There are still recently one more came, no?
Any department level proceedings, including the litigation, any demand from GST department will have to be disclosed. Yeah, financially it is going to impact the company, then it is significant material impact, performance, operations, all those things you'll have to apply. No? So naturally, whether it's the GST or otherwise, there's impact to be analyzed actually. Yeah.
I think now it's over, all the questions. And and if ask, and then they can unmute and ask the question also. Since we have today left with some few minutes, we can say, if any participant want.
No, the message is thanks, sir.
Thanks.
Nice.
Okay.
But Dipti, before I would like to tell the participants that you all appreciate that significant day by day. Considering this, in fact, we propose to hold our next webinar on significance of the role of company secretary. So, in any kind of questions, you may write to us in advance so that we will be able to cover that. But we need to understand what is the role of the company secretary, how it is becoming significant day by day, the increasing role of company secretary and all. We are going to deal with in the. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
I say thanks to everyone, the panelists, Mr. Randhir, Sudhakar, and Mr. Bala, all the participants for your active participation. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Mr. Randhir, for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be part of this discussion, and it is always insightful to have discussion with Sudhakar, Bala, and all of you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to Kanchan as well, because she has done a extremely nice homework, putting everything together in the topic wise and bringing out very briefly. And her flow was also very good. I must definitely recognize and record the appreciation on behalf of all of you. Thanks, Kanchan. Wonderful job. You're done.
Thanks, Kanchan. Very efficient on time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that credit goes to you. That credit goes to you, Kanchan.
Otherwise, participants were really worried we will able to finish the way we were discussing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I echo the same. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Okay.